education they've always dreamed of, so they can build a brighter future. You'll be feeding a hungry stomach and a hungry mind with knowledge that will last them a lifetime. That's the power of an education. Sponsor an orphan now with Islamic Relief.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everybody. I'm Preacher Miles, host of the SOS, the Shout Out Show. I'm hoping and praying that you had an amazing weekend. I know I did as well. We had an amazing week. I have to say shout out to Sister Satana, all the comedians involved in the Preacher Miles Muslim Comedy Festival. Also a shout out to Us Hub. And of course, a big thank you to everybody that came out on relatively short notice to come out and support the project, not for one show, but for two shows. I'm very happy to say that the content that we put on stage was amazing content, and we felt like we did our community proud. We're looking forward to this being released on Us Hub next month, inshallah, October at the latest. And like I said, it was quite a night, if you will. It was a revisiting, but it was also a relaunching, if you will. A revisiting, but a relaunching. We had a lot of people coming out who saw the original Allah Made Me Funny, but we bought them something new, something fantastic, something organic. A shout out to all the sisters who are on the show. Yasmin Al-Hadi, who did her thing. Athea Yaqub, who did her thing on the shout out on the Muslim Comedy Festival. It was amazing. We're actually hoping that we'll be able to get some of the officials, some of the top brass, if you will, from Us Up TV to come on here and talk with us and tell us a little bit about their plans and their vision, because we definitely saw a vision on Thursday, and I think we will be repeating that model very soon. In fact, we're going to be repeating the model for the festival at ISNA this year. The first Friday at ISNA, where everybody comes in, we're going to have a comedy show produced by Permissible Laughter, featuring myself, Moses the Comic, Marlon Hill, we got Athea Yaqub, and we got Omar Regan. So we had quite a lineup, brothers and sisters. So we're looking forward to it. We're going to have some special guests too. All right. So let me get to the topic today before it runs away from me. I had a lot of ideas ruminating around. I took a stroll down memory lane. I picked up a book that I had purchased after the Bush-Gore election, which resulted in a recount down in Florida. For those that don't remember, you need to do your homework. This was an election that went to Gore. Then everybody said, hold on a minute, pump the brakes. And it came down to the state of Florida recounting the votes. And after they did the votes, they gave the election to George Bush. There was a recount. There was Supreme Court stuff involved. I mean, there was a lot of trickery, a lot of trickery and foolishness, if you will. And what happened was Gore was not the president. He was declared president, but he was not the president. We had George W. Bush. Well, people say, well, what does that mean that we had George W. Bush? You look at the aspect that we had wars that followed George W. Bush. We had issues of political capital being used different ways. Now, he was in no way close to the previous president, Trump, but in many regards, the GOP party framed itself a lot for what we see now. And I want us to talk about that today because I don't feel like we're talking about it enough. I feel like we're kind of slowly brushing over this thing, not understanding that there's something underfoot that's going on right now. In regards to Trump, he hasn't actually said, I'm going to run for re-election. He has his legal problems. But you have to say that he's laid a pathway and given a blueprint / template for people who want to do the same thing. Now, people, we won't let them do the same thing, but it's not about you. It's about the people who have been led this way, oriented this way, that you knock off this Indian chief, then you can put another Indian chief in the same place. There are some facts that I will give in a loose interpretation, and I will also try and frame out a little bit some forecasting. We are in 2022. We're moving to the 2022 midterm elections. That will determine a lot that's going to happen in 2024. So I want everybody to understand that these things that we're talking about, going back to the Bush election, the Bush-Gore presidential election, that there is contagion, that there are things that are left in place. There's going to be some questions that I'm going to ask. Some of them come from reading this book, but also how are we really addressing this whole idea that's an assault on voting, assault on voting rights, assault on voting representation, and assault on voter, I want to say, um, integrity. We're talking about voter integrity this time at 2022, brothers and sisters, with everything that's going on. So, look, plug in. I'm glad that you made it back to the show. I'm glad to be back. Shout out to Sister Satana. She's going to be with us. She's been doing her study, so she's in the back. It's something to think about. It's really something to think about. I wasted a good part of my day just going through ruminations in my mind of what could happen if we're not really astute about what's going on right now. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. This is a Shout Out Show with Preacher Moss. Don't move. All right, we're back. I want to give a shout out, of course, to our loving, powerful, and always prestigious Shout Out Show family. The Shout Out Show soldiers. We have not been with them since Thursday. Apologies, brothers and sisters. I forgot to load up the show for Thursday, so it didn't come on. It would have been a rerun, but I'm just going to, at the top of the show, apologize for anybody that turned in on Thursday. I didn't do it. Satana, did you do it? She didn't load it. So I dropped the ball. And let me just own up to that. We're back, and it was a lot of things going on last week. So please forgive your brother. I'm not saying that I'm not accepting the responsibility. Of course I am. I'm saying I made a mistake, and inshallah, I will not make that same mistake. So please forgive your brother. All right? I take full responsibility. I take full ownership. Now, let's get to our Shout Out Show family. We got Sister Ree in the house. Happy Monday, family. Happy Monday to you. Sister Ree, peace and blessings to you, your family, your husband, your son, and all the other relatives spread out to the United States. We hope that you're having a good day, and thank you so much for always tuning in and supporting this platform. Next up, my main man, Altaf Rashid. Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brother. How are you? How is Toronto? How is Ontario? Thank you so much for tuning in. I got a special surprise for you as well. Maybe I'll do it a little bit later, but I'm very proud of this thing. We'll talk about it at the end of the show. Satana, make sure I don't forget. I probably will forget, but I'll remember at some point in time this week. It happens. So peace and blessings to you, my brother. And thank you so much for continuing to be our Canadian envoy to the show. Thank you very much. Next up, we got brother Eric Carter. Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Pray that you're doing well. Hope that you're doing, that you're blessed, you're cool, and things are working out to the best of your advantage. Whatever it is you do, man, we pray that you're blessed and you continue to receive blessings. Next up, we got Brother Bilal Salahuddin and his queen sister Sonia. How y'all doing? How y'all doing down in Houston? How's the weather? I hope everything's good. Maybe it's cooled off a little bit. I don't know, but everybody could dream that it's cooler in Houston. It's probably a hellfire, but there's no telling. But thank you too, despite everything, weather, everything. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. We appreciate you. Much love. Next up, got Sister Mary Moss, better known as Mama Son, who was in the audience. She enjoyed the Preacher Moss Muslim Comedy Festival. Shout out again to Azim Moses, the comic Athir Yaqub. We had Usman Habib. We had Yasmin Al Hadi. We had a special guest. Okay. We ain't throwing that out. And me. I thought I was fantastic on the first show. Satana's like, no, you weren't fantastic. You're right. I was brilliant. Thank you, Satana, for helping me correct myself. There's absolutely no humbleness here. I was fantastic. Okay. Thank you so much. Permissible laughter. Okay. But Sister Sana, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. She said, amazing Muslim Comedy Festival live presented with us up. Yes. Yeah, so shout out to Sister Brother Sohaib. Shout out to Mustafa Davis, who flew all the way over from Istanbul, Turkey. Shout out to the crew, top-notch crew. Shout out to Rome, who did his thing. We had a top-notch crew, brothers and sisters. Mostly Muslim guys who came, they did the job, they transformed that whole stage, cameras, everything, For a person who had to produce his own comedy special with Love Supreme, Anatomy of Gratitude, I was really, really happy for how things came together and how people made it work. And it was just an all-together effort. So I give it an A+. And I hope that when it comes out, you guys will receive it with love, understanding, and support. Okay? All right. We got one more from Mama Moss. She says, stay woke. Many of the January 6 people now change laws to negate our vote. So sign up as a voter, judges, poll watchers, etc. Participate. I'm going to talk about that today. All right. So today's discussion really begins with what is the value of the vote these days if people who are not necessarily connected to the voting process can, in many regards, they can change the voting process. I saw it back when Bush ran for office, and he lost. I'm going to put that out there. He lost. There was a recount in the state of Florida. His brother was governor of Florida, and all of a sudden, he becomes president. Okay, well, Gore made some mistakes, and some very critical mistakes were made, and questions were asked about the actual voting machines in and of themselves. I'm not going to get into conspiracy theory. These machines sit around unguarded. These machines sit around uncalibrated until there's an election. We have things like identity theft and stuff like that. So it would be pretty clear to me that if somebody wanted to steal a vote, it's relatively easy. It's like when you go to the gas station, you have to be careful about putting your card in a reader because somebody can actually put a fake reader there and get all your credit card information and clear you out. This is not to make anybody scared, but it's to make you aware that we should not be sitting around thinking that we're so secure with these mechanisms, these chips and two-way verifications. Because if someone made these things as security protocols, it's usually as a response to somebody who had breached the security protocol. And as we get here with this space of voting, the thing that is interesting is the closer we get to the actual votes, the more distractions we have, which have very little to do with voting. Right now, everybody's up in arms about President Trump and Mar-a-Lago and all those things. He took some papers from Mar-a-Lago. In the meantime, there's not an impetus being laid on the fact that Lindsey Graham, a sitting senator, has to sit in front of a Georgia judge and answer for what he did during the 2020 election. What was his participation? How did he make leeways for these things to happen? How are people, not even from the state of Georgia, trying to change the outcome of an election? Now, one thing I'm going to say about Bush, everybody had their eyes on this. What we have now is a bit of a covert operation. Again, not conspiracy theory, but we have operatives who are in the field to make sure that there are discrepancies in the votes. Listen to me. There's discrepancies in the vote or perceived discrepancies in the voting whereby they come to clear up their own conspiracy theories. It is the essential, is the equivalent, or metaphorically, of there's a fire in the house. We must go in the house. They go in the house. There's no fire. They light a fire. And they say, see, there's a fire. And thus, I'm the only one that knows how to put this fire out. It is counterfactual in two regards. Number one, you have people who are elected officials that handle the voting thing. See, the whole aspect of voting is that it's impartial, that it is protected, that it remains an integrity. It's a sacred act. I don't want to say religious, but it's considered a sacred act to vote. Sacrosanct, if you will. The interesting part now is the things that were used to deny votes are now they're now the same things that are being used to somehow discredit voting. This is a very important thing. The whole idea of discrediting voting goes back to African Americans, freed slaves who were voting. This is the first Reconstruction. By the second Reconstruction, African Americans, freed African Americans, are not allowed to vote. Well, why? Why they're not allowed to vote? And this is important. Because the powers that be, if they don't get the reaction or the result they want, somehow there's something irregular with the voting. You see what I'm saying? That there's something irregular with the voting. And when you put in or you infer that something's irregular with the voting across the board, that's a signal. It's a signal. If you look at countries like, Yugoslavia, I think it was Yugoslavia, and GOP people are going over to this country that is anti-immigrant, anti-diversity, anti-gay, anti-Muslim. They're going over to these places to figure out how those folks who are literal dictators are able to stay in power, and taking notes to come back to here to do the same thing. One of the first things that happens is that we call a problem with the vote. And if you call a problem with the vote, it upsets the apple cart because you have to look at what's the apparatus for the voting. The company Dominion has a multi-billion-dollar suit against Trump and cronies by virtue of the fact that these guys discredited their voting machines. Despite the fact everyone went through the voting machines and they found no irregularities, these people continue to pile on and say that this voting machine was corrupt. It was connected to liberals or the far left. And what you get is this real cluster mess, if you will, of an argument that gets away from the voting. The thing that's interesting to me at this point in time is the fact that we're not asking questions. It would go even further, and that might be a reach here. Satana, this might be a reach here. That the last 10 years of education coming out of public schools, the last 10 years in American education has had a premium on not talking about the American electoral process. When you read the books, they talk about old elections. They don't talk about the elections that were problematic. So you won't hear necessarily about Bush and Gore. You won't hear necessarily about Trump. In this episode, you won't hear about it. The whole idea that we had an insurrection that was built on denying the correctness of a vote is an amazing thing. Because voting is very emotional. Extremely emotional. When I was a kid, I used to say, what is the big deal about black folk getting a vote? Black folk getting a vote. And I realized by the time I was like maybe 8 years old, it's about preserving life. About preserving life. About understanding that if these things are unchecked, if these things are unchallenged, you can have modern day slavery right now, if you will, brothers and sisters, if people put it in the law. Case in point, the whole thing about abortion. And I'm not going to talk about pro-abortion, anti-abortion. It's just the fact that being able to put laws in place has seriously affected what that means for people. Now, what does that mean for people? The access to their bodies. Now, it's not just conceiving or having a baby. It is, when does life start? And the state tells you when life starts. And you can't go across. There's no permissibility if there's rape or incest or things like that. There's no flexibility. Even in the Quran, in jurisprudence, fiqh, there is allowance for these things. And let me say that again. There's allowance for these things. There's flexibility for these things. That childbearing cannot be used as a tool of oppression. So we talk about, we meander a little bit about, do our votes count? The bigger issue is, where do they count? and who's counting them? Where did they count and who's counting them? We'll be right back here on the Shout Out Show. Question: do our votes count? We'll be right back.
Hey, babies. Welcome to Radio WCUC, Convenient Urgent Care, home of the smart patient. This is DJ What It Do. You know what time it is. It's the top of the hour, and the request lines are open. You know what you want to hear. I know what you want to hear. Operators are waiting.
I just got to hear Don't Get the COVID.
Don't get the COVID. Put your mask back on. The Delta COVID, more contagious than before. Don't get the COVID. Go on and get the vaccine. You know that it can keep you safe, and your people living up in your space. Don't get the COVID. You need to wash your hands. The Delta COVID is more deadly than before. Don't get the COVID. Go on and get your vaccine. You know that it can keep you from dying. Don't leave your family all alone and crying. Don't get the COVID.
We invite you to join our fight against COVID and against misinformation. It's time to listen to the doctors and trust the science.
When I think of people dying that don't have to die, it makes me sad. Now's the time to be sober. Together we can make this thing over. Let's fight the COVID. Convenient urgent care, home of the smart patient.
All right, we're back. Listen, as I was sitting here thinking about letting the idea, do our votes count? It really hit me that I'm really asking, what is the value of democracy these days? If people can dismantle the Constitution that was already established for white establishment anyway, it was already a tool for white supremacy anyway. I'm like, now they're dismantling it with white supremacy. Not only, we're already oppressed, we're already targeted. Blacks, people of color, people, Muslims, we're already targeted. Now it is being fixed that you now have a tool that can actually affect the mainstream. The whites that don't agree with the current position of the president, Trump. I mean, this is a scenario, brothers and sisters, and I will call up Mitch McConnell and people like that, because while Trump is goofy and flamboyant and out of pocket all the time, these guys have continued to hammer away at voting rights. How many people outside of Stacey Abrams do we really know have a cohesive program to fight for our voting rights? We don't have Stacey Abrams pop-ups in DC, Virginia, Houston, California, and people seem to think that this thing is going to calibrate and fix itself. It is not. It is not. And the damage that's been done, more so than Trump just losing, he left the infrastructure to be able to continue to do the same thing. More so than just gerrymandering and stuff like that, more so than making it more difficult for people to vote. People now have gotten so bold that your vote won't count, that it won't make it to the final tally. You know, when Bush won, they talked about the validity of the vote. They had a term called a dimple Chad. You've never heard that term ever since. They had a term called the dimple Chad that said that the voting machine would misread, this thing is called a dimple Chad, and misread the votes, so they had to recount the votes. As I was telling Satana before the show, the question, the validity was at one point in time, the Supreme Court and the Attorney General said they're going to stop counting votes. They actually got an injunction to stop counting votes. They didn't want the result. Hear what I'm saying? They didn't want the final result because the final result might have given them something different. And in the book, The Best Democracy Money Could Buy, it was stated that the problem that Gore had made, or the mistake Gore had made, was they tried to count votes in one district. when they needed to recount the votes for the entire state of Florida. These things are not new, brothers and sisters. They're not new. Here's my problem, but we're not discussing them enough. We're not putting them in a place where we can have a larger dialogue about how this affects us. And while I love doing the shout out show and I love having everybody, I would hope that some of these conversations we have will be table conversations you have with other people. You know, we've discussed things on here that have been, we've discussed things on here while it seemed like it might have been, kind of random. It wasn't. We talked about the increase in suicide amongst Black teens. It still persists. I've seen 2 comedians commit suicide. Young. Less than 35. Young. Working comedians have their own shows, their own projects. And this is the thing, and I'm trying to say is that it's not endemic, but it's enough to say if that's what the generations behind us are thinking of, then we got a problem. If they're engaged in that, we have a problem. If we're not talking about voting, but we're spending years and eons talking about Will Smith slapping Chris Rock, then we're lost. We're lost sheep. I had a talk with Dave Chappelle this weekend, and I challenged him on something. I said we have to clear the air on something. That while you are doing X, Y, and Z, I said, what culture are you working for? He's my brother. I love him. I said, but what culture are you working for? Hip hop is not a voting electorate. Hip hop is not getting schools built. Hip hop is not coming up with bond issues to make that school improvements are made. Hip hop is not helping us get better school allotment money for kids in public school or checking charter schools. It's not taking the needle out of people's arms, brothers and sisters. It's not addressing things. I'm going to tell you, you could be a dope artist. You can be a dope artist. But if you're not conscious about what's going on around you, it becomes kind of counter. It really countercultural. We're not looking at the larger scope of what this is. I guarantee you now have people who are election deniers, who supported an insurrection. They're running for public office and they're winning. How do you think they're winning? What gives them the boldness and the confidence to run in the first place? Well, you have almost a year and some change unchecked about the electoral process. That there are people who are sympathizers towards Trump and whatever, and they're still in place. There are people. I remember I was going up through Ohio on a trip to Ohio, and they had a Trump-Pence poster in a cornfield, except they crossed out Pence on the bottom. And I'll say this and I'm going to get out of here. The question that we have to ask, do our votes count, points to the underlying fact that voting is not fair right now. It's not a fair exercise. It's not something that you do with confidence. When you have to ask, do our votes count, it comes to the fact that there's an underlying suspicion that someone doesn't want you to vote at all if you don't vote the way they want you to vote. It could be on the GOP side, it could be on the Democrat side, but I'm talking about the institution of voting as a whole. Why isn't it held sacred? And the reason I say why isn't it held sacred, because at the end of a vote, we have to live with the results. Whether we agree with them or we don't agree with them, we have to live with the results. And those results change lives. They ruin lives. They enrich people, but at the same time, they keep people poor. They make sure that schools aren't built. Teachers aren't paid. You see what I'm saying? And if we get comfortable with the fact that people can do that, and they can change around our lives because they hide behind laws that these politicians make, and they're able to make politicians are able to make these policies because they are elected, not necessarily by the mandate of the people. But if an election is 50-49, they won, and you have to deal with them for a period of time. All right, my brothers and sisters, I appreciate you. Again, shout out to everybody that came out to to Union Stage in Washington, D.C. We had an amazing time. And when we get a chance, I'm going to try and get a first cut of the comedy special just for the shout out show, just for all y'all. So we can just sit, y'all get your popcorn, and we'll sit and we'll watch it. And you guys tell me what you think. All right. Look, I'm going to get out of here. That's the SOS. Take care of yourself. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.